My guest for the next 45 minutes or so is a man I met last year when he delivered his famous McTaggart lecture at the Edinburgh Television Festival. Tonight he's delivering the sequel to that speech at the Science Museum in London. So please welcome to the stage Google's Executive Chairman, Eric Schmidt. Have a seat here.
Yes, hi, Krishnan. Nice to see you.
I'll grab this one. Well, future of the internet, technology, the skills we need for the future, these are all a big part of what you are now dealing with in your role at Google. So let's start there. And for this session, basically so that you know what's going to happen, I'm going to talk to Eric for a little bit about what he's doing at the moment and his thoughts. Then we'll talk a little bit about the various Google issues that are around at the moment that may not be entirely related to what he's talking about right now. And then I'm going to throw it open to you. So do have your questions ready. But let's begin with talking about this theme that you've been picking up recently about the next 5 billion people to be connected to the internet as they come online. Can you paint a picture, if you like, of how you see the web developing in the coming years?
Well, first place, thanks to everybody for coming to our Big Tent, our Big Tent event. I think we care a lot about the internet, personal freedom, expression, and many of you have been important partners to make that happen. If I go through the next 5 to 10 years, what's the big headline? And the big headline is more people are going to join us. They're going to join our conversation. They're going to be blogging. They're going to be tweeting. They're going to be using Facebook. They're going to be using Google's products, and that's a good thing. The rough numbers are about 1 billion smartphones, roughly 2 billion people connected to the internet. Again, the estimates vary, but they're roughly correct. And as you know, there's more than 7 billion on the planet. So the next sort of 5 to 10 years, depending on what estimates you use, it's reasonable to expect another 5 billion will be joining us. The vast majority of those people will join us on mobile phones. Today, the number of total phones in the world is approaching 5 billion, so roughly 4 billion of those are feature phones, which do not have powerful browsers, modern browsers like Chrome. And as those get replaced by very inexpensive smartphones, that generation will show up. They will love their smartphones more than you do, because their smartphone will be how they get educated, it's how they get entertained, and so forth. And they'll overload their local data networks, they'll use Wi-Fi offloads and all that kind of stuff. They'll program in their own languages, and we'll hear from them.
How big, though, is this divide going to continue being? Well, there's a huge number of people who, the internet will still not touch them with it.
Well, for people who have nothing, they will get something. The people who have internet today will see a dramatic improvement in internet connectivity over the next 5 years. So if you look at the rate at which fiber optic is being downloaded and the way new spectrum is becoming available and the speed of Wi-Fi hotspots and so forth, you will be able to do things like robotic holography and those sorts of things in these sort of privileged elites, the places that we all operate in. So everyone benefits from this. If you look, there's sort of a problem in the world with the bottom 1 billion who are various metrics, but they're the hardest ones. They have the highest infant mortality. They're governments. They're typically in wars, or they have corrupt governments, or so forth. And they'll be the last ones to get this. But there's a generation of people who today would be considered the aspiring middle class who've just come out of poverty in India and China, Indonesia, other countries like that. Those people will be joining our conversation, and we're going to be hearing them, and it's a great thing.
And how transformational do you believe it's going to be for that tier of people?
Well, it has a pretty big impact on governments. You can understand, if you look, I was in Tunisia and Libya for a while, and if you can understand Tunisia's revolution as a failure of the dictator to censor the internet. They managed to have rules on every other form of media, but they couldn't censor the internet. In Libya, of course, they had even worse governance problems, but that was also a failure to censor the internet. It's very, very difficult for governments that are autocratic and that are sort of not do not have sort of broad popular support for their existence to operate when so many people are empowered with these new devices. And that's sort of the headline. That's the underlying thing that the Arab Spring was about, was that finally there was a tool that allowed the already generally hatred of the government to be expressed and organized and ultimately lead to a revolution.
But is that something that is inevitable, that the spread of technology will be a democratizing thing in which helps freedom of expression? I mean, if governments got a bigger hand on regulation, on regulating the internet in their countries, if they found it easier to censor what people get access to,
well,
could the internet equally become an instrument of control?
Well, China is running that experiment now. And if you look, China can be understood as a success of censoring criticism of the party elite, but not a success of censoring anything else. So take a look at there's a site called Weibo, which is roughly the competitor. They don't allow American firms essentially to operate in China using various rules. And as you know, we moved to Hong Kong for all sorts of good censorship reasons. Look at Weibo. What happens now is that when they try to cover up some train accident or some other local crisis, citizens from China use the internet to complain, and it does put pressure on an autocratic government. One of the things that's interesting about the internet is that even people who have monopoly power, that is, governments that are not going to change, they're not democracies, are sensitive to shame. They're sensitive to embarrassment. And so you can use shame and embarrassment to hold these organizations, which are not accountable at all right now, to some level of accountability.
Beyond just spreading the internet, the world is gripped by the economic crisis at the moment. What is the role of technology in that, first of all?
Well, it's important to remember where the world is not gripped by the economic crisis. Brazil, for example, is growing more than 10%. There are a number of Asian countries, although China's growth rate has recently slowed, that continue to grow very well. So it's not uniform. The fact of the matter is that the global financial crisis was caused by errors and mismanagement of cash and the banking system, which have been well documented. But they're also caused by two other things which are much harder to manage. One is the sort of the nature of globalization. It would be much easier to say, Britain is an island, we love Britain, we're going to put a fence around it, and we're going to have our own economics, we're going to have a great time, right? And we're going to ignore all these other global trends. You can't do that. It's not going to happen. Same argument in America. It's not an island, but you get the same idea. People always want to forestall the effects of globalization, but it doesn't work. Globalization is here to stay. And the second is the rate at which businesses are automating. So I always like to think about, the good news about automation is that the quality for workers in an automating company gets better. They have more sophisticated tools, they're more productive. But the bad news is that automation prevents them from hiring another job that they don't need. So in order to grow jobs, which is what politicians really care about, you've got to come up with innovation, you've got to come up with business investment. Jobs are created in the private sector, not by governments, I should add. And you have to do all of that, and you have to do that in the face of knowledge workers, all the issues we've talked about, the financial crisis. And I think it can be done. It's hard.
So what do you see as Google's role in that?
Well, Google as a company's primary job is to make sure that you have access to the world's information. You can decide what you want to do with that, but our job is to get that information to you. We're very, very end-user focused. We don't make value judgments on how people choose to live their lives or what they do with that information. We don't think it's appropriate. We want to do things, for example, sponsoring more math and science education, more transparency. We care a lot about openness. So to the degree that governments are more transparent, we believe that it keeps them honest.
When you say sponsoring more math and science education, I mean, who are you talking about? Are you talking about the elite, or are you talking about the 5 billion who you want to reach?
Well, the answer to some degree is everywhere. If you spend time in Africa, and when I go there, I sort of visit with the top professors and so forth, you discover the startling fact that they don't have any textbooks. So they teach using Google. I mean, we didn't design Google as a math and science curriculum. It's not the way we think about it. It shows you how incredibly inventive people are. So back with the 5 billion, it's pretty clear to me that the solution to most of those people's problems is openness and transparency in the way their governments work, connectivity and empowerment of the individuals, and some notion of using the tools to keep their governments honest and to focus on job creation and becoming globalized.
How does an organization like Google, which is now one of the big global brands, big global companies, help stop technology simply putting people out of work?
Well, again, we don't state it that way. Google is not a jobs program for people who are being displaced by technology. What we would argue is that the way people solve that problem is by self-education. If you believed that in your job, that when you got your job when you were 20 or whatever, that it would never change, you were misinformed by people. The fact of the matter is that creative capitalism does in fact displace workers, and people have to retrain. And the best way to retrain is to retrain yourself, to be curious. And there's so many tools now. If you're interested in any one thing, again, using information, you could pursue that, and we want to help that.
And I mean, in terms of the way what you're talking about is a massive cultural change. I mean,
Well, culture, define it from what to what?
Well, I mean, every generation for the last 100 years has feared being out of touch, has feared being left behind by technology. What you're saying is we sort of need that to stop, aren't you, as well? And we need every generation to embrace technological change and to keep up with it.
Well, I'm making a statement about aging, right? That if you thought that the model was learn when you're in college or high school and then stopping learning, you were, again, misinformed. That the nature of these challenges that I'm describing, globalization, industrial innovation, the march of technology forward, requires retraining. There are many, many examples of this, and the classic one has to do with the sort of automated loom, right? And the invention of the automated loom and what that did to the traditional sheep herders. And in fact, people got through it, but jobs were displaced, and they were replaced by new jobs. And those new jobs had higher incomes; they were more productive, and in this particular case, they created an export boom that drove Britain to greatness.
You attacked Britain's record last year in your speech in Edinburgh on capitalizing on its ingenuity.
Yeah, it bothers me as an American, since most of the stuff that I learned was invented here, that you all have not retained that leadership, because I think you should have.
Do you see anything that has changed in 12 months?
Well, the curriculum, the computer science curriculum has in fact been changed through the efforts of the government to try to put more effort on computer science and in math, and I think it's a good start. It's not over. There's so many things that have to get done. But at the end of the day, let's go through this scenario. You have sort of choice A and choice B. Choice A is that Britain can be a farming island with good services and pleasant people and so forth, or Britain can be a knowledge island for the whole world. That's a choice, right? The latter is going to be infinitely more interesting, infinitely greater incomes, infinitely greater income growth, and much better suited to the population that you have. You have to decide, right? My argument is that the changes are relatively straightforward. We understand investment in math and science education. Britain is already among the most connected of the nations, which is great, right? And the culture, of course, is fantastic. So you've got a lot of things going for you.
While we're sort of on what the government are doing, can I also just ask you about something we were talking about this morning? I want to go through a few different Google topics now, reasonably quickly, before we open it up. We were talking this morning about legislation in Britain around censorship and pornography. What's your advice to the government on whether they should legislate to limit access to pornography?
Well, first place, each country makes a different decision on adult pornography. It turns out that the good news is that essentially every government, even the governments you hate child pornography. So that's sort of the one thing we all agree to as a globe. But I think first it's a cultural or a decision. What I worry about such laws is that they're often slippery slopes, and that if you're going to have such a law, it needs to be defined very precisely, and it has to be technically implementable. And I sort of leave it at that. I think I shouldn't speak on whether the country wants to legislate on a particular content, but if you're going to do it in a way that's precise and legislated and correct and implemented. In many other countries, legislation about adult pornography is in fact an attempt at legislating something else.
I mean, what it goes to, though, is the heart of sort of whether politicians, as a species, get to the internet.
No. I mean, again, this is a country of law, right? So you guys make laws, you can make your laws, and you suffer the consequences of whatever laws you make. That's not my point. My point is that if you're going to make a law, make it in such a way that it actually works.
And do you think it is technologically possible?
It's extraordinarily.
To protect children?
Again, in general, it's difficult for computers to understand the nature of the visual images that they're seeing. People have worked hard to do it. It'd be great if we could. The best practices that we know are where prohibited or illegal content is uploaded and then it's immediately noticed by other people through various forms of notification and then immediately taken down. That seems to be the best. The alternative model, which various people have proposed, which is to require pre-screening before posting, would essentially eliminate the modern internet as we know it, because then every post to Facebook, every post to Twitter, every post in Google, blogging, and so forth would have to be pre-screened. That's called censorship. So you're usually better off, if you have prohibited content, having an agreed upon societal definition of what that is, and then when people do that, immediately take it down and then send it to the authorities. And that's typically how we do child pornography, and that's worked pretty well.
In the European realm, the big story this week obviously has been the antitrust disputes with the European Commission. They are saying you've got to change your ways. You've actually got to change the way you deliver search results, or they are going to prosecute you and fine you. Are you going to change?
Well, they've sent us a letter, and we're going to have a meeting. We've agreed to have a series of meetings with them to understand the specific concerns. We think we're pretty okay. We think the things we did made sense and were consistent with both European and local law, but nevertheless, we're happy to meet with them and try to understand this. I don't want to prejudge what we'll do until we hear the details of what they're going to say.
Because that was characterized. That response was characterized in some bits of the press this week as a bit dismissive. They're saying, yeah, we'll have a chat, but we don't really buy into the idea that we've done anything wrong. Is that fair? I mean,
well, as I think I just said, we're not aware of anything we've done wrong, but we're happy to be educated to the contrary. So,
because what the
so I hope that's a clear answer.
I mean, what the complainants are saying, in simple terms, is that you treat Google search results differently to the way you treat everything else to favor them. Do you do that? Is the algorithm different in any way when it comes to Google?
Well, the first question is that a crime? Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think you are either.
Do you think you've got the right to do that, then? That it's perfectly reasonable?
Well, again, the answers depend on the country, so forth. But as far as we can tell, the judgment that we've used in the way we've designed Google is pro-competitive and positive for end users. If it's not, then we want to hear why. We want to hear the details.
Do you think it's an attack on your freedom of speech?
There are people who have been writing that there's a similar initiative in the United States that corporations have freedom of speech. I don't want to get into that. These are, again, our legal arguments. But I think ultimately our defense is that we make the decisions after a serious amount of user testing of what we think is in the best interest of end users. And our success is determined by being one click away. In other words, there's a competitor that we don't want you to go to, so we have to be honest, honorable, and so forth. It gets complicated because we intermix results from different kinds of searches. So we have web search, we have YouTube, we have things called one boxes where we have special answers. And that's where it gets tricky, and that's the source of the confusion.
When I interviewed you almost a year ago, I mean, we had a conversation about where you thought privacy was going as an idea. And I just wonder whether you think that's evolved at all over the last year. I mean, what we've seen over the last year is continued growth of the internet, of mobile devices, of people spreading their data around through social networks. We've also seen revelations that certain Android apps pass on users' data, fears about all sorts of other similar sorts of things. Has the privacy question moved on at all for you?
I haven't seen much change. Privacy in general is going to be a concern, I think, forever. It has been for a long, long time. The thing that's sort of new is simply the rate at which people are publishing more information about themselves. And remember that once that information is published, it cannot be taken back. So this is your lifetimes of achievements, if you will, your lifetime award for activity. One way to think about it is if you're born today, you have an identity where you have complete control over your own identity because you just got born, but that as a percentage, your identity gets defined more and more by others and less by yourself over your lifetime. I don't think we understand exactly how governments and so forth will regulate that. But the fact of the matter is, in Google, our position has not changed, that we think that you should have the right to go into Google and edit the information that we know about you. There's something called a dashboard which allows you to do that. I encourage you all to try. And we believe that our policies are at the state of the art of this. I think that there will be it's sort of an evergreen issue, that there will always be issues of this question of the right to privacy versus the right for example, public service to come and see what you've been doing. How those things get adjudicated will differ by country.
Are we moving, though, to a time when guarding your privacy is no longer the social norm?
The consensus of people my age is that the younger generation doesn't seem to care very much about privacy. When you actually talk to them, you get a different report, which is that they do in fact care, but that these tools are so functional that it's a reasonable trade-off from their perspective. So I think that the answer to your question is not yet written. I don't think we really know. The one thing that is true is that the record of what you did 10 years ago or 20 years ago used to be very hard to find, and now in the future it'll be very easy to find. The example that I would use is, let's say that you're an 18-year-old guy and you're completely falsely accused, and even in Britain, where you have strong privacy laws, you're completely falsely accused, there's a trial, and you're completely acquitted, and it was completely a sham. Now, in the old time, all those records would have been sealed, nobody would have known, and you could go about your life. For the rest of your life in this particular scenario, that information will be known, and even if it was subject to the very significant privacy laws that Britain has, which the United States does not have, I should add, it would have been leaked, right? And we've had examples in Britain of things being leaked even though they were supposedly private. So I think the fact of the matter is that the notion of once published, not deletable, the no delete button on the internet, is a very significant issue for society as a whole.
And you will maintain your sort of neutrality, if you like, on what apps do. Whether they harvest your data, whether they pass on your contacts to third parties, all those sorts of things.
Our strategy with respect to apps, this is primarily for Android, has been to say that we're not going to police them ahead of time. This is unlike Apple, by the way, which sort of does a sort of micromanagement of the apps before they show up. We think it's better to have a more open structure, and then as people discover things that they don't like or issues, they'll alert us, and then we'll deal with them. So we prefer a reactive model, and that's, I suspect, what will continue.
Why do you prefer that approach? Is it because it's easier for you, you have less to do, or is it because you actually favor openness?
Well, I hope it's the latter, but it's also true that the former is true. At the end of the day, we're better off in an open society where people are kind of helping each other out rather than in a society which is prejudging things. And so Google has always been in favor of trying to get these things, let people look at them, transparency in as much as we can, and then we believe that the good citizens of the world will sort it out.
Can I ask you about the Motorola finalization of this deal? Where's it going? What's it going to yield?
Well, as you know, we announced last August, I believe, that we were purchasing Motorola. We wanted to have a stake in hardware businesses. We liked Motorola. They were a 100% Android partner and had done a pretty good job. We close as of this morning in Chicago, which I think means right now. And so I believe literally there's a meeting with all the employees to actually make all that happen. As part of that, we'll be announcing the things that we're going to be doing with Motorola. But from your perspective, what I think it means is more investment in Motorola products under the Motorola brand. The Motorola brand will continue. It will be run as a separate division. And a lot more focus on Android and the tools even that they have today.
Okay. I think it's time to open it up to you in the audience. Who would like to kick off? There's a hand right up at the back there.
Kirsty Hughes, Index on Censorship. You said early on in answer to the pornography question, but I'm asking this in a much broader question, that you didn't really want to speak about whether if governments want to legislate on content. But in terms of freedom of expression, campaigners around the world over hundreds of years have usually pushed back those boundaries precisely by arguing with governments. So are you saying that Google is not going to have those arguments, you're going to leave it to others of us, or would you like to elaborate on that?
I'm trying to avoid having a fight with each of these governments over this from a Google perspective. What I'm trying to say is here are the principles. We care about transparency. We care about rule of law. We care about legitimate democratic governments. If you're going to find content that's prohibited, then you better be precise about what it is. It better work. It better not leak. And in general, it's a bad idea. So,
yes, on the front. And then down here. Hang on, just wait till the microphone gets to you.
I wonder if you could say something about your social strategy. It was launched with very significant fanfare over the last year, but there have been a lot of rumors in Silicon Valley that Google Plus hasn't realized the kind of success that you were hoping for. So could you comment on that? And could you also comment more broadly about the place of social in Google and in the search engine itself?
Thank you for the question. What I like about this is a rumor creating a target that we didn't say, about internal goals that we don't have, about comparing us to a competitor who is exceedingly well-managed, well-run, and is 12 years old. So let me answer by saying that if Google is as successful as with Google Plus, in less than the 12 years that Facebook has been around, we would be pretty happy with having 800, 900 million users like that. So the fact of the matter is, maybe Google is one of those companies where we can't sort of grow anymore. We have to always start huge. But the reality is that our Google Plus efforts did start in the last 6 to 12 months, depending on which products that you describe, and they're doing well. I think we've announced our numbers of users. They're well more than 150 million users. The users that use Google Plus are using it in ways that make sense to us, and they're in particular using Hangouts, which is the sort of collaborative video sharing. That appears to be the current breakout product. We have a lot of stuff coming. From our perspective, there's value in creating that social graph independent of whether Google Plus is an end-user success, which we obviously want. Think about it this way. Don't you think that YouTube will be better if we have information about who your friends are and we can do better targeting of YouTube videos for you? Don't you think that Google Search, again, with your permission, I need to say very precisely, that Google will do a better job if we have more information that signals who you are, what you care about in terms of search results? So there's lots and lots of examples where that information, so-called social graph, would be very, very useful to making Google more effective. So we already are beginning to see that in our core business. And again, we have an early success with Google Plus. So the answer is Google Plus doing as well as we thought. Is doing better than I expected, given the difficulty of entering a market late relative to Facebook and the others.
So you think it is a success as things stand?
Absolutely. Right, absolutely.
Do you think Facebook is a success as things
Of course.
Yes, down here.
Yeah, hi. Hello, it's Kelly Fiveash from the Register. Eric, I'm actually disappointed in your response on the antitrust case with Europe right now. Specifically, I'm disappointed because there are 4 areas of concern that have been expressed. It's been very clear that the Commissioner wants you to come up with some form of remedies. And to just say that there's only going to be a discussion somewhat suggests that maybe we're looking at Google accepting penalties down the line. Where are we on that? You've been given weeks to respond.
I'm sorry that you're disappointed with my answer, but I'm going to have to repeat it.
Yeah.
I had a nice conversation with the Commissioner last week on the phone, very polite. We received a letter on Monday morning of this week. Today is Wednesday, so that's 48 hours. In our conversation and in his letter and in my response, which is going to him today, we've agreed to have further discussions because they have not given us the letter that you've seen or heard about is all we have heard from them. We have not heard the details. And so I, for one, am not going to speculate on X, Y, or Z until I see the details of their concerns.
But you must agree that they're clear that they want remedies on these 4 areas of concern. And it seems to me that Google's not really willing to play ball there. And if that's the case, then surely penalties will follow,
I'm sorry.
It's quite cler that a statement of objections...
I'm having trouble hearing the first part of your sentence because of the echo. Could you say it again?
I'm just saying that it's quite clear. There you are. Thank you. It's quite clear that if Google doesn't, accept that there are these remedies that the Commissioner is asking for...
Well, he hasn't told us what those remedies are.
But the 4 areas are there in print for all of us to see in that letter to you.
And in broad terms, you're saying those four
but
areas aren't true, aren't you?
Okay, let's go again.
I just don't feel like Google's actually answering the question here. You know, we've got weeks. The Commissioner's saying that you have weeks to respond with remedies. Otherwise, the statement of objections could follow. I think that's very clear. And I'm surprised that Google's not giving a better response than the broad one that we're getting right now.
Somehow you and I just don't agree.
Well, no.
I understand.
Wouldn't be the first time, Eric.
Okay, thanks.
No. But this is important. I want to make sure I answer this because we're highly on the record here. His letter is very clear that he is encouraging us to have a conversation with him for a period of time. Mm-hmm. We completely agree. We have also said that we disagree, that we are in violation in general, but we're happy to talk to him. Until they are precise over what areas of the law, in their view, we have violated, it'd be very difficult for me to speculate on the outcome. So you're trying to get me to, and I want to be clear here, you're trying to get me to anticipate what will happen, but until we have, Google, unlike many other organizations apparently, actually wants data. So give us the data, give us the precise example, the precise problem, and we will understand that. We don't know what that is. I'm not going to speculate until we get that.
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 1.
I particularly enjoyed what you were saying about the potential positive impact of the new technologies on the next 5 billion people who are going to be coming online. But I wonder if we're being rather too optimistic. In the 1950s, C.P. Snow, as part of his Two Cultures lecture, pointed out to him that industrialization was going to remove global poverty, and he believed it would be gone by the year 2000. And is there a danger that all of us in this room, with the possible exception of Andrew Keane, are being too optimistic about the potential of communications technologies and the sorts of things which you and Google are doing?
Again, it sounds like we disagree a little bit. If you look at globalization, what is the narrative? It's had all sorts of positive and negative effects for us, but it's had a huge impact for about 2 billion people who went from absolute poverty to what we would think of as lower middle class poverty, especially in Asia and in Africa. So we should be celebrating that, and nobody wants to hear that, but I think it's true. From their perspective, the last however many decades have been phenomenal in terms of their mother's health, child mortality, food access, general safety, and so forth. If you take a look at communications, communications is a naturally price-reducing technology. The prices fall due to Moore's law every couple of years by a significant factor. And so there's every reason to believe that the spread of information technology will reach at least 6 of the 7 billion or so forth reasonably quickly. And it will give them access to Lady Gaga, 100 different languages. Here's an example. You want to solve a problem of education in a village. Give them phones that come preloaded with the teaching materials for their language. So when they're sitting there idle in their huts or whatever, they can at least use their phones to educate themselves. That doesn't require any bandwidth. It's cheap, if not free. So there's plenty of ideas like that.
Yes, over here, number 4.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. So you mentioned that you feel that Google's role is to make sure that people have access to information. Obviously, I think that's a great thing to do. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Alex, who was up here earlier, I think was talking about the sort of next step on, which is about what you start to do with that information. Mm-hmm. Do you think the future of Google is to do with how people use that information, or do you think it's about just providing it? Because it seems to me that just providing data and information isn't enough.
Well, I would answer. Let me answer the question: what do I think the future of Google is, and see if this answers your question or not. We have historically been able to produce these 10 links, sort of roughly 10 links and sort of answers, and then you had to sort of rummage through. We're trying to go from that kind of an answer to an insightful answer. So we can answer questions now about facts. So, who is the Prime Minister of Britain, or what is the capital of Britain, that kind of thing. But we still, if you ask us a question, a general terms question, we can't really analyze all the data. Artificial intelligence techniques are getting good enough that we're going to be able to go from essentially syntax to semantics. We'll be able to understand more of the meaning of your question. As to what you do with that information, I think you'll want to do whatever you want to, and we'll be happy to provide that with that.
Just on Twitter, a question is, when will the UK get a Google autonomous car?
That's a very good question. We're still working on the autonomous cars. They are phenomenal to go in. It is the weirdest thing to have the car drive you around. But the reality is that if any of you is ever in one, you'll discover that there will be a person in the car behind the wheel, and you'll be treating the autonomous car more as sort of an autopilot or a cruise control. I think that for a very, very long time, there will always be a human in that driver's seat.
Why have you done it? I mean...
Because it's fun.
It's sort of an odd thing for you to do, isn't it? I mean, because there's the conspiracy theory that says, here's Google that wants to know even more about our lives and where we go, and which shops we park outside,
Krishnan,
and it's all about advertising.
This has nothing to do with that. This was just fun. Where are you coming up with this crap?
Oh,
We're just having a good time. Look, in serious, we happen to have, because of Google Maps, we happen to have incredibly accurate maps of where a car goes. And so this researcher from Stanford, who's absolutely brilliant, named Sebastian, had been working on these sort of self-driving cars. Larry thought this was the neatest thing, so we started this project, and we managed to come up with a real breakthrough. If you think about it, I don't know the number of deaths in Britain, but I can assure you that when these cars are on the road, there will be fewer deaths of them being drunk than you being drunk, right? So it's fundamentally going to be, it's an improvement to have the car drive you.
Yes.
Google Buzz led to an investigation by the FTC.
Sorry.
Then you had the Street View Wi-Fi debacle, where you had a team where they realized, some of them knew about the fact that the code would be grabbing Wi-Fi data. You had a team knowing about it. You had a team building Buzz. At the end of last year, you had a team which built a system which was able to hack Safari on the iPhone to set cookies when that wasn't right. Does Google have a management problem where people think that because you're operating under the "don't be evil" motto, and because everyone thinks they're doing the right thing, they actually do bad things?
Again, you're linking three separate, isolated activities and go ahead.
Yes,
go ahead.
Which all happened at Google.
Yes, Google has thousands and thousands of teams, and we're not perfect. But so to be very clear, the three things that you described are separate, and they were either not approved or they were mistakes. In the case of Google Wi-Fi, certainly was counter to our principles, and it was clearly a mistake. When we discovered it, we reported it to the authorities. The Safari one is more complicated because of some issues around industry practice, which we can discuss offline. Over and over again, we are pushing the envelope, and occasionally we make mistakes. Those were mistakes, and for which we've apologized.
But there is maybe something just to chase there for a moment, which is about culture, isn't it, within Google? In that, do you think your culture encourages people to do things without them thinking, have I broken the law or have I broken ethics?
Again, no. This is the classic, if I may, journalistic error. You're taking 3 things out of 10,000 and you're generalizing for the other 9,997 ones. It is not that case. However, we're not perfect. So I don't think we'll change our culture. We have spent an awful lot of time with our employees explaining the subtleties here. A lot of these issues are much more subtle than you might think, and the people involved thought they were doing the right thing, but in fact they were doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Ollie Barrett. I have quite a general question for you, Eric. You must be presented with hundreds and thousands of opportunities, and yet I bet you're still looking for things. So my question for you is, either on a business or a personal level, what are you currently searching for?
What am I searching for? Well, the good news is I use Google all day and all night. When you're in Europe and you wake up in the middle of the night, you're still on Google. The biggest trend in our industry is what happens post-social network. In other words, the social networks and the web phenomena, the web computing model that's so strong today, what happens after that? There's a lot of evidence that there are startups and technology that do a couple of things that are interesting. One is your mobile device as a telemetry device. The mobile device, again, with your permission and all that. It has an accelerometer. There's all sorts of interesting things that you can do with that. There's a lot of startups doing that. There's a lot of new things in commerce. And commerce is, again, Britain is very much a leader here. The US is well behind Britain. But there's a lot of reasons to think that once these payment systems are in and once you can begin to aggregate all that data, there are many, many new businesses, marketing offers, and sort of people love that kind of stuff. So the combination is mobile, local businesses, and the commerce things. And all of those based on powerful phones, Android and iPhone seems to be the answer.
Just on Twitter, someone asks, what does Eric think of the UN Dubai conference on internet regulation later this year?
This is the ITU, ICANN?
Yeah.
Google has not taken sort of too much of a position here. I will tell you that I don't understand what the problem is, and I'm concerned that any change to the way the internet is governed will produce a negative outcome. If the problem is that the ITU and those folks don't feel like they have enough of a voice, what is the problem that they really have? There's a lot of people in my world who believe that this is really a smokescreen for governments that are not very democratic to getting more control and more censorship over the internet. If that's true, that would be very bad. We're clearly opposed to that.
Okay, we've got about 90 seconds, so I just want to take a couple of comments or rhetorical questions because we don't have time to put them to Eric, but yes, go on.
Hello, Eric. Very interested to hear you've been to Tunisia. I'm about to start advising the Tunisian government on development of their creative industries, so I'd love to talk to you afterwards.
Sure.
But my question is, Google keep increasingly manipulating search based on the personal algorithms, and we're all going to be faced with a narrower and narrower internet, to the point where we all have an internet of one. And I'm extremely concerned that the diversity of search is going to decrease, and that must be a bad thing.
Okay.
This, by the way, has been studied. A lot of people have your concern, and so far it does not appear to be true. It appears that the personalization algorithms are insufficiently personal to produce the outcome that you're describing. I would also say that if you are concerned about this, you will always have the ability to search anonymously, in which case you'll get sort of whatever a generic answer would be.
And last one over there.
I guess getting back to the extra billions of internet users, I know that sustainability is an issue very close to your heart.
Sure.
And I'm sure you've run the numbers, but do you have any thoughts on essentially the kind of the race between the sustainability and the efficiency benefits of getting more people online and the infrastructure and kind of device costs of generating the mechanisms to get them online?
My guess would be that if, using our kind of technology, if people simply started to make their buildings more dynamic and use passive efficiency, the net benefit of getting that education to them and the cost of the servers versus the savings from making the buildings more efficient would be so overwhelming. So I'm going to take the position, which is self-serving, but I think it's also true, that more information, even at some cost of energy efficiency, the leverage of that information in terms of building design, automation design, understanding the horrific effects of climate change and the literally hundreds of millions of people who will die unless we act on this kind of stuff. And by the way, in America, as you know, there are politicians who still think this stuff is false. They clearly don't believe in facts. Right? So let's get the facts out using our technology, and I think the benefit far outweighs that.
And there we must leave it. Eric Schmidt, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.